And just one question popped up in my head for you, Bill, and for you, Dave, because, well, you were in that documentary. The documentary you already mentioned about this National Geographic approach, which is not like a scientific one, but more like a popular one. In the documentary called Drain the Titanic, it was stated that you were the expert, you, especially you, Bill, and Dave as well, that you stated that Titanic broke up under the surface.
Это территория зоны крушения. В ходе нового исследования создали точный план участка, и впервые ученые определили его площадь. Данные не оправдали их ожиданий. На мой взгляд, участок крушения довольно мал с учетом размеров корабля. Весь 300-метровый корабль лежит на 5 квадратных километрах. По мнению Билла, если бы корабль распался на части на поверхности, то обломки покрывали бы большую площадь. С учетом того, что он падал несколько километров в толще воды, то площадь рассеивания довольно мала. Чем ниже в воде произошел раскол, тем меньше расстояние, на которое распались обломки, и тем компактнее их площадь рассеивания по дну океана. В этом исчерпывающем аргументе Билл видит доказательство того, что корабль раскололся гораздо глубже в воде, чем считалось ранее. Только так можно объяснить небольшой участок рассеивания обломков. На мой взгляд, из всего этого можно сделать вывод, что корабль раскололся не так быстро и не на поверхности, как ранее считалось.
Well, I'd like to state that I wasn't very happy with the Drain the Titanic show. In looking at the spatial relationships of pieces of the ship on the seafloor, it's not very widespread. The bow is an outlier to this, but just the concentration of artifacts and debris doesn't go well for the ship totally breaking up at the surface. So I think it was connected a little bit longer than people think. And I think that the bow broke free from the stern after the ship had sunk. That opinion was based on discussions with some naval architects. So it wasn't just me saying this. It was.
So, Bill, you're saying that the rupture occurred at the surface? Boom.
Yeah, it cracked open at the surface, but I think there were still lots of things holding it together, including the keel of the ship. And when the keel finally snapped loose, I think that was probably the last thing holding the ship. And then there's these two large pieces of the keel out in the eastern area of the debris field. And then you kind of move, as you move to the stern, you see this progression of things coming off the stern section. And, it's a unique pattern. Could be totally wrong in this assumption, but the heavy debris is in a linear trend starting from the keel working towards the stern. It's a straight line. And that also kind of goes against the idea that the stern was spinning around because it's such a narrow path. And it might have been, but it's a linear pattern. It's not a radial pattern.
So it didn't spin around all the time, and spin just before collapsing, crashing into the bottom.
Don't really know. I don't see the pattern on the seafloor of something that's spinning in a big arc. And Dave Conlon from the National Park Service did a statistical analysis of debris there, and there's this definite linear trend. And what's interesting about that trend is that it's very close to the ship's heading that night. And which, you know, all sort of fits together. You know, you know, we've got this long debris field of light objects, but that's more associated with where the stern is than where these other objects are. And so some people have said, well, the stern's spinning around this big arc and it's throwing things off in different directions. The pattern just doesn't show that. You know, I'm not saying it didn't spin. I'm just saying that it's a very tight pattern.